Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I'm so glad you're here. I have the best episode for you guys today. I have been so excited to bring you this story because I know you are just like me. You love a true crime story that hasn't been covered much, and you love vintage news footage and actual video footage of these old crimes. And I found a treasure trove of the best news footage and search footage, and even this incredibly obscure serial killer in custody. I had never heard this story before researching it, and I've definitely never seen this footage, so yeah, I'm excited. As I always say, every victim matters and each killer has something to teach us. These obscure stories are just as important as the stories that get a lot of news coverage. When women started vanishing in the late 1960s in Odessa, Texas, the public was living in fear, and the police were under immense pressure to find the monster who was taking vulnerable women and doing unspeakable things to them. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this case, and some people believe that the real killer is still out there, living free, while a fall guy took his place in prison. At one point in time, the police even brought in a psychic to handle the evidence, and I found actual video of this incredible event. This is the little-known story of Johnny Meadows and the Odessa Lust Murders. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. It's a cool fall day in West Texas, which means only one thing: football. Jason and I lived in Midland, Texas for a year, and we spent a lot of time in Odessa. This is the part of America that inspired film and TV shows like Friday Night Lights. High school football is king in this part of the country. These are water tower towns. The iconic landmarks dot the landscape and let you know when you've left Bronco territory and entered Bulldog country. Midland and Odessa are sister towns, and the rivalry between the two high schools is legendary. This is the land of big cowboy hats, big trucks, and even bigger attitudes. They like their Lone Star beer, their donuts and kolaches, and they love their football. People in the area were enjoying the mild fall weather. The long, hot summer days were gone. The smoky smell of Texas oak and pecan wood burning in fireplaces to heat the homes filled the air in the mornings, and by afternoon, it was warm and sunny. All was as it should be until something very disturbing began to happen. On the 19th of October, an Odessa barmaid named Linda Kugat took her laundry to a local laundromat and threw her wash in the washing machine. She sat and waited for the cycles to finish while she read a magazine. And then something happened that only Linda and her killer know the details of. Linda Kugat left the laundromat and she was never seen alive again. She was only 24 years old when she vanished. Immediately, alarm flags were raised. A search party of police volunteers began looking throughout the Midland and Odessa area, searching for the young woman. Odessa lawmen and citizens alike searched desperately for the mother of one, walking through miles of pasture and drainage ditches, scouring vacant lots and abandoned buildings as they continued to look for the pretty dark-haired bartender. A week passed, and then 3. And then, on December 16th, 1968, Linda's handbag was found in a pasture 15 miles northwest of Odessa. There were 3 address books in the large handbag. That was good news for the police. They were always happy to find address books before there were cell phones because it gave them a list of people that could be suspects. Linda worked at the Bowler Bar, located at 1610 West 10th Street in Odessa. All of her co-workers and acquaintances had been questioned, but the police got no leads. A blood-stained miniskirt was found in Linda's West Side home. People claimed she was wearing that skirt before she disappeared. Had the killer taken her to her house from the laundromat, or had she made it home and been attacked there? The search was ramped up, and then they found Linda. Her raped and murdered body was found not far from her handbag. The coroner stated that she had been dead for at least 8 weeks and that she had been strangled to death. When she was found, her arms were bound behind her with 2 nylon stockings. A third stocking was bound tightly around her neck and had been used to murder her. She was wearing Bermuda shorts and a blouse, but her underwear had been removed and then stuffed inside her shorts. This made police believe that Linda had been raped and then forced to redress before being kidnapped and taken out to the desolate field where she was strangled and abandoned. The discovery of Linda's body and reports of the terrible things that had been done to her shook the close-knit communities of Midland and Odessa. And then it happened again. On November 5th, 1968, a motel owner named Dorothy Smith was found shot to death in her apartment in Monahans, Texas. There is so little information on this murder, I couldn't even find Dorothy's obituary, which is something I can almost always find. All we know is that Dorothy was murdered and she was found with her hands bound behind her back in the same manner as Linda. This time it wasn't with nylon stockings, it was with a television cable. Now the town was in a panic. This is not a place that has a lot of murders, and when there are murders, they're bar fights or shootings over money. Women don't get brutally assaulted and murdered and left out in the fields or killed in their apartments in this part of the world. As if the panic was not rising already, the murders continued. On July 16, 1970, Eula Miller's dead body was found naked and violated on an Odessa flat. Eula had been stabbed repeatedly. Eula Miller went by Kay. She was a strong and independent woman who liked to work hard and play harder. I love this photo of Kay's hairstyle from back in the day. Kay worked here. This building is now abandoned, but it used to be called the Tempo Club. Kay was involved in sex work at the club, so there were a lot of suspects. A woman named Brenda, who lived in the same apartment building and was friends with Kay, noticed that there were a lot of flies collecting on the outside of Kay's apartment windows. And then she thought, I haven't heard from Kay for a few days. Brenda was concerned, so she went to the building manager and asked that they open the door. When they got inside Kay's apartment, they were horrified at what they found. Kay Miller was laying at an angle on her bed with her legs hanging off. She had been dead for some time and her body had begun to decompose. On the floor of the bedroom was a handwritten note that said, "Come on in, I'm in the bedroom, Kay." It was a note she had left for someone else. On the back of the note was the name Don Barnett. The police found Don. He was interviewed and had an alibi. It was determined that Kay was killed around July 13th. That was the last time she had been seen. There were several men interviewed, including a food delivery man who delivered fried chicken. There were also 2 men that Kay had been seeing. They were both interviewed. And there were also, of course, men that had hired her. Every lead was a dead end. Kay Miller's murder is still controversial. We're going to get to that in a moment. But by the 3rd murder, this was all anyone in Midland or Odessa was talking about. Sadly, the killer was far from finished. On September 16, 1970, Nancy Miller was abducted from her home in Kermit, Texas, while her children slept in an adjoining room. The entire process is undertaken again. The police search for Nancy, but this time they cannot find her. Months go by, and then almost a year. Finally, Nancy's skeletal remains were discovered on an oil lease south of Odessa in June of 1971. But before Nancy was found, another victim was killed. On January 9th, 1971, Ruth Maynard, the wife of an Odessa policeman, was reported missing. With both town in a panic, Midland and Odessa, the police didn't have a hard time finding volunteer searchers whenever women vanished. Sadly, it had almost become routine at this point in time, and so once again, volunteers were rounded up and they began the search. 5 weeks after Ruth went missing, on April 5th, 1971, her body was found dumped just 2 miles from where Lunda Kugat was discovered in 1968. Now, the term serial killer was not being used at this point in time, but the police knew they had a killer on a spree. They were convinced that all of the murdered women had been killed by the same man. Semen was found on some victims, but not on others. Some victims were bound, others were not. So looking back with a modern lens, there are already red flags as to why these murders might not have been linked. But in the early 1970s, they didn't have the advantages that we have now. The police, these Texas tough guys, were so desperate to try and solve this case that they brought in a psychic and let her handle some of the evidence as well as some of the victims' belongings in hopes that she could help them find some clues. I find this footage absolutely fascinating.
Somebody's had a rather bad experience, a very harrowing thing, but seems to have come out of it all right. Is this one of the girls that...
Kathy. I imagine that could be one of the girls.
Oh. Was this one of the murdered girls?
What was his name on that? Kathy?
I don't feel that it is. It could be. A seeking death. I'm reckless. Wild. I don't care. I've tried my best. But what's the use?
Wall. Could this be a challenge or was it a wall?
So Julie, that's good. This person was filled in. I expected so much. And there's so little. So little of everything. The opportunity. It just never came. I'm having a lot of trouble breathing. I'll have to start this one. See if you get, I don't know, it must be hay fever or asthma or something. I just kept on. That's one that's came through stronger than anything. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the psychic wasn't able to help. The police were at a standstill, and the public was in a panic. The public is very, very supportive of law enforcement in Texas. You don't hear a lot of, these guys aren't doing their jobs and that sort of thing. The citizens in Texas are, for the most part, very proud of their cops, but the cops were feeling the pressure. It was the disappearance and murder of Gloria Green that really put law enforcement officers over the edge. Gloria Green, who went by Nix, disappeared from her secretarial job on June 17, 1971. She was 26 years old when she vanished after work one day, and there was something particularly strange about Nix's disappearance. She had left her shoes and her personal belongings in the office. Her shoes were found under her desk. She was known to take them off when she worked. Had someone come into the office and forced Nix to leave with them in such a hurry that she'd left her shoes behind? That's what it looked like. The sheriff goes on state television and admits to the media that they have no suspects, multiple murdered women, and no leads. He asks that men hunting in the area keep their eyes open for Gloria Green's body.
Till this time, We would like to ask all of the hunters, the quail hunters who will be out in the fields and the pastures in this area, to be especially watchful for anything which might indicate that a body might be buried, or if they find anything that appears to be of evidence in this case. We would appreciate if they would be especially alert and call us if they do see anything.
What's the reward?
It is $1,500 for information leading to the her whereabouts.
Do you still have leads?
No, we have exhausted all the leads. We keep getting leads from time to time, information. All of this has been checked, and we're still about where we were.
You don't have any suspects?
No suspect at this time. No.
The search continues through miles of barren rangeland as the Ector County Sheriff's Department proceeds on the theory that the woman is dead and her body is somewhere in the general area. Sheriff Slim Gabriel and a deputy were out again today, as they have been every day since the woman vanished. They cover the rough terrain in jeeps and sometimes on horseback. The helicopter and private aircraft which were used at the beginning of the search in June have long since been discontinued. Gabriel says there is no doubt in his mind that the woman is dead and that she was killed. He says he has a good lead on a suspect, but can do nothing until the body is found. Gabriel also says he has information that the person or persons who apparently killed the missing woman also were connected with the murders of one or more of the other unsolved cases in this area. Mrs. Green is the fifth woman. The others were found dead, usually with a stocking around the neck.
As unbelievable as it sounds, there was then a horrific child murder in this tiny town. On Monday, August 23rd, 1971, 11-year-old Johnny Janelle Henderson went missing from her home, this little house here, in the early hours of the morning. Johnny's mother left to go to the store at 7 a.m. When she got back, all of her kids were still asleep, but Johnny was missing from her bed. 3 days later, her body was found in a caliche pit 200 yards from the back gate of the house. Caliche is a type of clay soil that's prevalent in Texas. The little girl was undressed and lying face up. She was wearing only this beaded necklace at the time. Oh, my goodness, that's horrific. An area boy and several men were brought in for questioning and were given polygraphs. No arrests were ever made. Then the police, of course, had to wonder, could this murder be tied to the rest of them? The police had hit a brick wall. The public was in a panic, and the cops were failing at catching this killer, a madman who was taking and killing women from this little Texas town. But then, as is so often the case, the police got a phone call. Just as it appeared that hope was fading fast, the Odessa police got a phone call from a cop in Aztec, New Mexico. He wanted to tell the Texas lawman that he had a strange little man locked up there in the Aztec County Jail, and this guy was telling tales of murder. Ector County Sheriff A.M. Gabriel flew to New Mexico from Texas to interrogate the suspect. His name? Johnny Meadows. Now, this was not the first the sheriff had heard of Johnny Meadows. Johnny had been questioned earlier in the case because he knew two of the women who were found murdered in their apartments. Johnny Meadows was the married father of three. He had a criminal record dating back to 1954. He'd been convicted of writing bad checks and even of rape. Johnny was questioned once earlier in the investigation, and then the sheriff had to let him go. Months later in the investigation, the sheriff wanted Johnny brought in a second time, but Johnny Meadows had skipped town. He had left Odessa and no one knew where he'd gone. So when Sheriff Gabriel got the call from New Mexico and the cop on the other end of the phone said the name Johnny Meadows, he knew this could be a big break. Sheriff Gabriel arrived in Aztec, New Mexico, and went to the jail. He talked to Johnny and realized this man knew too much about these crimes. Then the sheriff went to see Johnny Meadows' wife, Dolores, and he paid her $2,000 in cash that he'd brought with him. There were some shady tactics back then, no lie. After the money changed hands, Johnny started to talk, and he told the Texas cop where they would find Gloria Green's body, Nix's body. At 3:45 a.m. on January 20th, Sheriff Gabriel telephoned his deputies from New Mexico and instructed them to follow Johnny Meadows' directions. They did, and those directions took them to a vacant lot in South Odessa. Underneath a rotting mattress, they found the skeletal remains of Gloria Nix Green. Later that day, the sheriff escorted Johnny Meadows back to Odessa, where he was charged with the murder of Gloria Green. I found the actual footage of Johnny Meadows arriving back in Odessa and being booked into jail.
34-year-old Johnny Meadows, shown here in stock footage, the object of a widespread search after he jumped bond in Lubbock and Gainesville, was arrested yesterday in the New Mexico town. However, he escaped from the San Juan County Jail and was recaptured a short time later at the home of a friend. The sheriff of Gainesville, Bill Pratt, told Channel 7 News late today that he has begun extradition proceedings. Meadows is an ex-convict who has charges pending against him in at least 3 cities. He was free on bond made through a Lubbock bonding agency. However, when he failed to appear for trial in Gainesville on a theft by bailee charge, the bonding company offered a $300 reward for his return. A New Mexico report that Meadows was wanted on a murder charge was incorrect, according to Texas officers. Meadows was questioned about the disappearance of Gloria Sue Nix Green last June and about the murders of 4 other Odessa women in the past 3 years. Lubbock officers said today they also want to talk with Meadows about unsolved cases there.
According to Gabriel, the man being held was an acquaintance of the missing woman. She is the 4th area woman to disappear within the past 2.5 years. The other 3 were slain and their bodies found in desolate oil fields. Also unsolved is the slaying last July of a 5th woman whose body was found in her apartment. Concerning the arrest of the man in Gainesville, Faught pointed out no murder charges could be filed in the case until the body of the victim is found.
The public was relieved to hear that the police had the madman in custody. Not a lot of questions were asked at the time of the arrest. People were just happy to hear that it had occurred. But later on, there would be some questions regarding the validity of some of the accusations Johnny was facing. The Ector County District Attorney, a man named John Green, gave an interview to the Texas State News, talking tough and letting the public know that Johnny Meadows had not been coerced, that he was being treated well, and that the case would be handled in the courts and not in the media.
John, what's your reaction to the judge's ruling this morning?
Bob, we're a bit disappointed in the ruling of the bond reduction, knowing the man's past record and so forth, and charges are pending against him. As all the judge did was reduce the $25,000 bond down on assault with intent to murder charges out of Midland down to $5,000, which was normal procedure. We, of course, opposed this, but the judge made his decision, and probably in all reality, it was fair at that amount of money on this case pending.
If his attorney makes those bonds that are still pending now, can he be freed?
Yes, he certainly can, just like any other person that can be freed or let out on bond. This man will be.
What about any future action by your department? Do you see any now at this time?
There is pending now a case, several cases against this man, and our records indicate that he is an ex-convict, and of course, when the grand jury meets, in all probability, if what we have in our files now are correct, he will be indicted as a habitual criminal. The charges that have been filed against him. Of course, this whole proceeding has been thrown out of proportion by the defense lawyer, calling the news media and newspaper and so forth, and telling that the sheriff illegally restrained this man. This is not true. This man was held on a Midland County charge. All this hearing today was to reduce the bond down, which the judge has done. Any other crime that the defense lawyer might know about, certainly we do not know about, but I'd like to hear about it if he does know. We have not illegally restrained this man. The sheriff has not, and the judge so ordered that this morning overruled the defense motion. And apparently it's just some publicity stunt by a defense lawyer. Of course, I would like to say here that we try our cases in the courtroom and not through the news media.
Information begins to spread about Johnny Meadows. He was a 34-year-old oil field worker. They're known as roughnecks. Jason worked in the oil fields for about 5 years, but he was in sales. He sold downhole drilling equipment, so he mostly dealt with company men. But the men who actually operate the oil drilling equipment are called roughnecks, and there's a good reason for that. It's a terribly dangerous and difficult job, but it pays really, really well. You don't have to have any skill to become a roughneck. roughneck, just brute strength and the willingness to do an awful job. So as you can imagine, this profession does attract some tough characters. Johnny Meadows was brought before a judge where he heard the charges against him. People were shocked when Johnny's wife Dolores was arrested as well. This woman had actually assisted her husband in some of the murders. At least that's what the public was told initially. Dolores's indictment was dismissed a few days after her arrest when Johnny stated that he was lying when he said Dolores had helped him. He said he was angry at Dolores because she told him she was going to file for divorce after he was arrested. So to get back at her, he told the police that she helped him dispose of some of the bodies. He just sounds like a peach of a guy, doesn't he? It's not bad enough he's killing women. He's going to blame his own wife as well. Johnny went on trial, and in 1972, he pled guilty to murdering Gloria Green. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Texas deputies announced to the media that they had signed confessions from Johnny Meadows stating he had also killed Linda Cugat and Ruth Maynard. Johnny was charged with both of those murders, but in 1973, the indictments were dismissed. Johnny Meadows was sent to rot in prison, and the public hysteria calmed down. The murders also stopped. But then questions began to make their way through the cafes and bars of Texas. Some of the cops who'd worked this case weren't so sure Johnny was their man, and they were talking about it. Eula K. Miller's case was a particular sore spot. Johnny Meadows was never charged with her murder, but cops and citizens alike talked about Kay's murder as though her killer had been caught. The problem is, he hasn't been. Kay's case is a lot different than the other murders. She was stabbed, not strangled. She had no semen on her vaginal swab, and she had not been bound. Her case is officially listed as unsolved. 10 years passed, and Johnny Meadows came up for parole. Sheriff Gabriel, by then retired, went to the parole hearing and testified that he was in strong opposition to Johnny's release. The former sheriff told members of the parole board that Johnny Meadows would, quote, kill within 40 hours of the time he's paroled. Gabriel believed Johnny was that dangerous. Johnny Meadows' application for parole was denied. In 1984, an author named J.R. Nash examined all of the Odessa murders and stated that he does not believe Johnny Meadows is the killer and that the victims are actually part of a different case altogether, a case known as the Texas Strangler case. And yes, I'm going to cover it. In 1986, Johnny Meadows' attorneys filed an appeal in the U.S. Court of Appeals. The appeal was denied. I had to dig so long on this story. I worked the better part of 2 days to come up with what little information I could find, even though I did hit a treasure trove of vintage footage. But believe it or not, I could not verify a single scintilla of information on what happened to Johnny Meadows. That is so strange in cases like this. If you know, please comment. If Johnny was 34 in 1971, that means he was born in 1937. If he is still alive, he would be 87 years old. Now, people don't usually live that long in prison, and I did a search of the Texas Department of Corrections. There are 2 Johnny Meadows incarcerated, but they're 24 and 42 years old. They're not him. So I think it's probably safe to say that Johnny Meadows has left this earth. I want to send lots of love to all of those affected by this terrible man and his terrible acts. And I have to wonder, besides Gloria Green, how sure are we that Johnny Meadows is the serial killer so many believe him to be? Was he the monster killing pretty young women and dumping them on the hard Texas clay so many years ago? Or is there a maniac who got away with murder in Odessa? Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. It helps a lot. First, I want to thank my patrons. Some of you very generously give a few dollars a month to help me keep the episodes coming, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And you are getting bonus content come the first of the year. I have a whole thing I'm working out. You know, I've got 2 podcasts that I have to talk about. This one is Dining with Death. It's the archival series of videos I posted to YouTube years ago. I took the audio from those episodes and made a podcast with them. This is the current podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I post brand new episodes every Monday and every Wednesday, and you will hear stories on this podcast you will not see here on YouTube. Both the podcasts are on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. And I have an announcement today. I am working on a third podcast called 15-Minute Mysteries with Stacy Lee. It is about vanishings and disappearances, medical mysteries, and historical mysteries. I'm kind of excited about it. I know it's Christmas time and money is tight, Lord knows. But if you're gonna give a few bucks to a good cause, would you consider our fundraiser? Our community raises money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested. We are trying to raise money to get some of those kits tested and get the DNA samples in CODIS. If you watch this short video on my channel, it explains everything we're doing and all the ways you can donate. I keep a spreadsheet with everybody's name, donation amount, and date of donation. We are about halfway to our first goal. Are you doing okay? Honestly, are you doing okay? Because it is so much right now. They're banning TikTok. We've got political unrest everywhere. And now we've got bird flu that they're saying is going to become a pandemic, within the next 6 months to a year. I am so tired of living through historical events, and I know I am not alone on that. So are you doing okay? If you're not, can I give you some old lady advice? Sit in the sun when the sun comes out. Go for a walk. Do something that is an act of service. There is actual scientific research that shows doing acts of service cures depression. Getting involved with service organizations cures depression. Drink your water. Take your vitamins, and don't sit and wallow in bad news all day long. We've got to get to a point where we find joy again. We've got to get to a point where we choose to be happy and not sit and worry all day long. I just worry about you. I love you guys, and I appreciate your support, and I want you to be okay. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.